Welcome to Trinity Radio. It is I, Braxton Hunter, and over there is
Jonathan Pritchett.
And you found the Christian channel that loves Atheist. I'm often told...
And loves everyone else, too.
I've often been told that eventually Christianity is dying, religion is dying, and it's going to be nothing... But by the way, on the Friday live stream, if you're new to the channel, I know we have a lot of folks that are new to the channel. Just want you to know it's a little more casual. We take our time. We banter. If you don't like that, I get it, but that's what we do here. Did you know, Jonathan, that there is a parable, I don't know that it's real, about a shoe company that sent a man to a new unreached place where they never sold their product, and he gets there, it's way out in the jungle or something, and he says they don't even have shoes here. And he calls back and he says I can't sell any, there's no prospects here. So they send a plane and they pick him up and they bring him all back, and they don't sell any shoes there. The next guy goes down to the same place and he says nobody wears shoes here, and they say, oh, you want us to bring you back? He says, no, I've never seen so many prospects. Listen, for someone who is an evangelist, someone who wants to reach other people with the gospel message, if there are more unbelievers, there are more opportunities to reach unbelievers. Of course, we want everyone to be believers, but I'm ready to sell some shoes, so to speak. What about you, Jonathan?
I saw a study that said that the world's population by 2050 will be 9% atheist.
By 2050 will be what?
9% atheist, the world population.
Yeah, well, they don't have any kids, for one thing, at least not many, comparatively. Okay, so today we're going to respond to some stuff about free will, but also your questions. Today's show is more than anything else defined by you. You get to decide what we talk about. Well, I guess ultimately we decide, because if you're talking about things we don't want to talk about, we just might not answer your question, but we'll try to answer questions, and we'll try to say things like Happy New Year to Miss Matola. Thank you so much. We're going to start with a video of someone I take to be a pretty popular TikTok voice. Dr. Pritchett was just questioning why TikTok so much lately. I try to encourage him with the comments that many of our patrons made the other day that, hey, look, the reality is these are the questions normal people are asking. Let's find out what some of those normal people questions are.
What an excellent question. If Judas had free will and chose not to sell out Christ, then what would have happened? I guess if Judas would have exercised his free will, then the whole plan of salvation could have come crumbling down. Luckily, God intervened, though. Don't worry, God wouldn't let some silly little thing like free will get in the way, see? Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. See, he had it covered. Or what if Pharaoh would have let the Israelites go the first time like he kind of wanted to? Oh, don't worry, God took care of that too. But the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them as the Lord had spoken to Moses. Don't worry, God doesn't let pesky things like free will get in the way of him doing whatever he wants.
Jonathan Pritchett, who is sitting from your perspective and in reality to, well, from your, my right. And he has done his, a lot of his work on this area particularly, and teaches some courses relevant to this issue of free will in the Bible. And of course, I've had some debates. He's had a debate on this issue. So we like to talk about this. Jonathan, I guess now you no longer believe that free will is biblical after that.
Everything that he just said was kind of wrong.
All right, well, unpack it for us,
Well, I mean,
my
first
friend.
of all, the idea that salvation could have been thwarted had Judas not betrayed, as if they couldn't have just gone and arrested him at some point.
Right.
Right? But I don't know why free will is all of a sudden not a factor. It was predicted that Jesus would be betrayed. That doesn't imply any sort of causation. He says, well, Satan entered in Judas. That doesn't mean that like Satan possessed Judas and took away Judas's free will. Mm-hmm. Judas was going to do that anyway, right? To say that Satan entered into Judas, the adversary, is depicting the fact that is who Judas is operating under and on whose behalf.
So you don't take that passage to mean that Satan demonically possessed Judas?
No.
Or if he did demonically possess Judas, that doesn't mean determinism follows. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, entered in the same sense that, I believe that the Holy Spirit enters us. I don't believe that the Holy Spirit possesses us in that sense, right? So I don't see that as a sign of, I don't read that in the sense that Satan took over Judas's functions and volition
right.
and all of
wearing Judas like a costume.
Right.
Right.
I don't see that at all. I see that John is telling us that is that's not God having it covered. That's Satan doing something, and Satan is not God. Last time I read the Bible, so even if you're a Calvinist and says that God uses Satan instrumentally, in that sense that God is using Satan as a pawn, which you don't necessarily have to be a Calvinist, but deterministically causing Satan to do certain things to deterministically cause Judas to do. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, it's what's with all of this chain here?
That's overreading what's going on here.
Well,
right?
It's putting a lot of philosophical stuff.
Judas is representing the adversary, right? He's working and operating under the behalf of the adversary. That's what's going on there. That's what Satan entering Judas is, not Satan controlling Judas.
Now, what we could say, I think we both agree with, I know I do, is that sometimes God accomplishes his plans in light of evil by allowing certain things to happen or certain agents to do things.
But that's not causal determinism.
But that's not. But what is interesting is you'll find certain places where it says God did a thing, and then later you'll find out that God allowed that thing. And so even when we say God did a thing, sometimes it means God did it by allowing certain things to happen. Yeah. But that's not to be confused with the determinism discussion of did he...
The Bible gives us examples of what demon possession actually looks like. Demons responding on behalf, through a person to Jesus, for instance. We know that's not what was going on with Judas.
Yeah.
Right? So we have a picture in Scripture of what demon possession looks like, where somebody's being controlled, in that sense, and that's not what we get there, in my opinion. Now, your mileage may vary.
So what do you do with Pharaoh then?
Oh, Pharaoh, that's even worse. Okay, well, first he said, like he originally wanted to. Okay, so Pharaoh had been using the Hebrews as slaves, right, during his entire... He just decided before any plague, I want to let him go. Or before the first... No, that's not what happened. In Exodus 4, God says that he is going to make obstinate Pharaoh's heart. But Pharaoh didn't want to let him go. And Pharaoh was making obstinate and strengthening his own words. There's 3 Hebrew words that our English translations translate as hardened every time.
Which may be why Juan Thompson just said, isn't that hard?
You've got
Are you talking
Kabid,
over?
yeah. And they all three...
I'm adding to your conversation. Yeah. Isn't that hardening of Pharaoh later in the text, Juan says?
Yes, but it goes...
No, he's
but it's not
with
clear.
You.
See, some people will say, Pharaoh hardened his own heart before God ever hardened it. No. I think there was in the first 5, I can't remember because, that's just off the top of my head, but I do remember that there was one time at least where Pharaoh hardened his own heart first, that's true, but God already said what he was going to do back in Exodus 4 anyway. But it's not like clear 5 times first Pharaoh and then God started doing it. No, it doesn't work like that. There's either a time or two in between Pharaoh's hardening his own heart, then God hardening Pharaoh's heart, then Pharaoh hardens heart, and then it becomes more God hardening heart. But like I said, there's 3 different words, and basically a lot of it is one of the words is to make obstinate. One is just to make heavy. One is to make courageous or resolved. Right? But our English version gives hardened. But I want to go back to my debate with Sonny Hernandez and Theodore Zachariades when they brought this up, or the question came up, and I'm like, when it says that God made someone's heart hardened, let's just take Pharaoh making his own heart hard, like Pharaoh was already doing what he wanted to do. What do you think that means?
Pharaoh's already doing what he wants.
Is that Is that Jedi mind tricks? Right? Is that mind control? Is that is that possession? What do you think that means? I don't think it means. Yeah. What do you think that means?
When it says that Pharaoh,
forget Pharaoh hardening his own heart.
Okay.
God hardens Pharaoh's heart. What do you think that means? Do you think that God possesses his mind?
No.
Do you think it means that God controls his thoughts, actions, words, deeds?
No, what I think it means is that, and this is the most, it's kind of like Pharaoh had made of himself a kind of person, and God said, fine, in an act of judgment, you're going to be like that for a while.
That's exactly what it means. Mm-hmm. And that's why...
And to put it very crassly, it's like, you know, whether this is true or not, you know, your mom used to say things like, don't make that face, it'll freeze that way. Well, you made a face, and God said, fine, you're going to look like that for a while.
And this is why I don't like English translations translating all three of those words as hardened, 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 because you miss the nuance of the different words of making heavy, making more resolve, correct. Because you think about it, Pharaoh relents, lets him go, and then he hardens his heart again, right? And then... you know, you see them pursuing the Israelites across the desert and across the Red Sea. Well, after you just went through all those plagues, right? After you went through all of that, and then you acquiesce, and then you decide to change your mind again, and you're seeing all of these big things happening that's bad for you. It takes guts to keep going, right? To be that obstinate. So... God strengthened Pharaoh's resolve to do what he already wanted to do.
Right, now this guy doesn't have this problem necessarily, depending on what his worldview is, but the Calvinists, I know there are some Calvinists in the chat, at least I'm presuming that, since New Reformation Apologetics puts hashtag Calvinism is true. The problem with
Calvinism is so flippantly dismissible that if Leighton Flowers wasn't still arguing with you people, no one would care anymore. Sorry, Chris Date. I don't take it serious.
The problem with them for this story is the same thing that Leighton has pointed out many, many times, which is this guy is the guy we were responding to is merely saying that when people acting freely don't do what God wants, he just steps in and makes them do the evil thing he needs them to do to get whatever done. But what the Calvinist is saying is, no, God was already deterministically controlling Pharaoh, and then he decided to deterministically control Pharaoh. That doesn't make any sense. It's like the why put a blindfold on a blind man type thing. Right.
I mean, yeah. But...
because if you
it doesn't have to make sense, Braxton. Because hashtag Calvinism's true. Don't try to make it make sense.
But because and we love you, New Ref. Glad you're here.
I love giving Calvinists a hard time. Our patrons love it when I give Calvinists a hard time. So even though I have, here we go. Some of my best friends are Calvinists. That's actually true, but I wanted to say it facetiously just to annoy people. Yeah. But yeah, I love giving Calvinists a hard time because I mean, look, I dealt with this stuff 10 years ago. There's been nothing new, and everything old that Calvinists keep rehashing has been just so debunked.
But back to the point, Pharaoh says,
I keep going.
Away from the bluster, Pharaoh says, the Calvinist says, oh yeah, but Pharaoh would have done this other thing. He would have been merciful, and then God determined him. Now, if this is the Calvinist speaking, we want to say, because of this, Pharaoh would have done what? Without God determining him and hardening his heart, the Pharaoh would have done what? Whatever God determined him to do, right? So really what we have is just God determining to do a different thing than he determined him to do before. But you're acting like there was something other that could have happened prior to God's determination.
Yeah, but the response to that from the Calvinists, for trying to help them along here, is to say, but God uses means, and hardening was the means by which he deterministically brought about.
Hardening was the means by which he did what?
So
he took away what from Pharaoh?
Calvinists whine, but Calvinists are going to whine, but it's dominoes all the way down, right?
What changed in Pharaoh? I'm asking you. What changed on the Calvinist view between Pharaoh a moment before, in terms of the metaphysics, in terms of
probably Pharaoh's own phenomenological experience of how much more resolved he is to continue in his course of action.
He experienced a change. If he was determined to notice it, he noticed that he's now acting. He's a passenger that experienced it differently. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, like all determinism is, we are passengers.
I know, but you and I wish to put a microscope on this and say, wait a minute, you're trying to show God determining people in the Bible, right? So you point to Judas, you point to Pharaoh, and you say, look, at this point, God started determining them. Well, great. I understand you think that. What was the case right before God started determining them?
Braxton, you're flattening it out. This is a fully orbed, diamond-shaped, non-flattened compatibilism across the multiverse, okay, and all the dimensions therein. See, because God deterministically causes things one way and then decides to deterministically cause things in a different way. Mm-hmm. So he was causally determining Judas in this way prior to causally determining Satan to enter Judas to causally determine Satan to causally determine Judas, right? It's just different. You're flattening it out. So it's still dominoes all the way down, right? It's still fatalism. Sorry, it's fatalism. Go back to the early church fathers. You had contingency, necessity, fatalism, and free will. Those are your categories. And by the way, monotheist. No, but faith's a pagan word. No, monotheists were using the word pagan in Second Temple Judaism literature, discussing these kinds of things. No, paganism was a monotheistic word too. They use that word. So anyway, it's dominoes all the way down. But what you have is a bunch of black and white dominoes. But then there's this green domino called the hardened Pharaoh's heart domino. So God, he's watching his dominoes fall as he decreed, and then he decides, okay, here I'm going to put in. There's a gap there where God's going to put in the green domino of hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Right.
The domino would have fell anyway had a black and white one.
It's still a domino.
Did nothing. Right. It's just, hey, look, an action sequence. Right. God placed he in time decided to place a domino there so it looks like something's happening. Right. But the dominoes would have fell. And by the way, if you only have but God just decided in eternity past that at some point over the course of time, he's going to put the green domino there that's different than all the others. And so that's what's going on. The thing I haven't heard from Calvinists is, okay, how is it, no, that's not a domino.
Well, no,
yes, it is.
What
yes, it is. It's
sophisticated Calvinists...
It's just a different color domino, but it's still determinism and dominoes all the way down.
What sophisticated Calvinists would say is, no, it's compatibilism. It is all dominoes in a certain sense. But that doesn't negate free will, because there's a sense in which you can have free will in spite of determinism being true. Yeah, so, all right, well, there's your response to that guy. All right, so...
I'm still waiting. Atheist said, what I said about Calvinism, we've already kind of refuted all of their points. He said, that sounds like atheists saying, no, I've not heard any new... I read this stuff when I have time between administrative duties, but I read this stuff and I see lots and lots of biblical scholarship, even from Calvinists, right? But anything related to the soteriology debate, no arguments are new. They just keep putting a spin on the same idea.
Are you riffing on where somebody said something like, that apologists, this is like apologetics, no new
where atheists have said all your apologetics have been...
Well, with that, I just want to say, there's always this desire to co-opt whatever thing we're saying that they think sounds a bit too clever or bombastic or something and say it back to us. I just had a guy where I had the AI write a poem, Why Atheism is Wrong. He's like, now do one, Why Theism is Wrong.
You did do one.
And but I didn't do it publicly, and I just said no. I don't want to.
No,
it's get your own thing, man.
But here's the thing. We find a lot of atheists out there who present new arguments, right, in the field, in these discussions, and Christians presenting new arguments, right, because of new data that shows up. There's no new data.
That's right. Anybody got questions?
That has come up in any sort of biblical scholarship that moves the needle for Calvinism, while, even into that, I don't want to say that there's a whole lot of, because New Testament theologist Nick Quint, right? He named his cat after John Barclay, who wrote a big book called Paul and the Gift, right? And a lot of people read this book and they think they discovered something new about grace that 35, 40 years ago about the patron-client reciprocity meaning and how it all shifted with Augustine and all of that. No, the context group was talking about all this stuff decades ago before John Barclay discovered, or basically wrote his tome. Though his tome, what it adds to the discussion is a historical overview of how that all shifted. But as far as people who discovered Barclay's book and decided, what's this stuff about grace not meaning what it originally meant, and the way theologians talk about it. No, people were talking about that for decades prior to Barclay's book. It just takes time for this stuff to piddle out. So, when I talk to Calvinists, first of all, I have to deprogram all of the overloaded, theologically embellished super words before I'll even have the conversation, because they're just the word predestined doesn't mean a god or a god's taking a person from one belief system into a different belief system. It's not what predestined mean. So you have to wait, we have to get back to ground zero with this if you want me to talk to you, because you're still going and operating on assumptions that words mean your super definitions, and I'm not playing that game anymore because it's just silly. So it's kind of hard to talk to Calvinists unless they're willing to at least show evidence why,
But what's your answer
besides
generally?
500-year-old theologians talking about 2,000-year-old documents. I don't care what they said about grace. I want to know what extra biblical sources,
Yeah, so
let's talk about sin. You want doctrines of grace? Let's talk about Seneca's on benefits. We'll talk about that.
So what's your simple 2-sentence answer to what that guy said about Judas and Pharaoh?
Sentence number 1, your basic facts of the story are wrong. Sentence number 2, all of your assumptions about the facts that you kind of got right are wrong. And do more research.
All right, so
that's 3 sentences. No, and is a conjunction followed by a period. And do more research as part of the second sentence.
So I had a question that somebody asked me about Isaiah 14. Where did it go? Do you take, this is from Rich O'Cat, do you take Isaiah 14 to be about just Babylon or both Babylon and Satan? Let's read through it together, Jonathan. Starting in verse 12. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mountain of the congregation on the farthest side of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be the most high, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners? Jonathan, what say you? Is this talking about Lucifer, or is this talking about a human king?
I'm inclined to say a human king.
I am too. The reason that everybody jumps on is this word Lucifer in verse 12. Yeah. But as many of your Bibles will note, this could be a day star, bright shining one, something like that. And so there's, there are a couple of passages in the Old Testament. What's the other one that could be talking about Lucifer that people think is talking about Satan? There's another one, and
Tyre.
Yeah, it could be the king of Tyre. It's the king of Tyre, but is it also talking about Satan? And anyway, that's the one I think where it's talking about you were in the garden and all of that. And I think that is more likely talking about man and man's desire to come up in the garden and come up and overtake everything.
Like alluding to Genesis.
Right. It's like they'll say it's alluding to Genesis and it's talking about he's the serpent. And I'm saying, well, it could be alluding to Genesis and it's mankind. And this is has risen up to this point. And and another problem is you have this talk of like, maybe it's just in the other one, but you have these mentions of your shipping lanes or your exports and things like that. This seems clearly to be talking about a man.
Yeah, see, like, I don't know. I'm more read up on, like, New Testament use of the Old Testament. And one thing that I know that I want to get more well-read in, you don't have time to read everything as much as you want to, but I do want to get more into the discussions around the Old Testament use of the Old Testament, right? Like later books referring back to
Ezekiel 28 is the other.
So I want to get more read into the Old Testament use of the Old Testament because I read a lot about the New Testament use, So that's something I want to get more read in.
Yeah. Yeah, so New Reformation Apologetics is being a cool Calvinist. Love you guys too.
Because he doesn't just being facetious.
I know we all want to do justice to God's word. I welcome any meaningful discussion.
I do too. So I would like to have, the kind of Calvinists that I would like to have discussions with would be like Gregory Beale, for example. I mean, incredible New Testament scholar, because I want to ask questions like, okay, given your method of exegesis for all of these other things, and this is something that James White might actually agree with me on, right? Because James White, which I don't think that he's actually accomplishing what he thinks he is, but at least he thinks he is, and at least he recognizes it's important. Your exegetical method should consistently yield the same kind of method that you would use whatever your methodology should consistently. I mean, and granted, yes, all the different literary genre, all the features that you would do with any particular an epistle versus a narrative versus right, taking all that into account, still have and so I would like to, it's a question that I've even asked Chris Date. I said, Chris, if you took the same kind of, I've said this to Chris Date, I've said it publicly before, so that he knows. I'm not saying anything that I haven't said before, but I was like, I think that if Chris Date consistently put the kind of, intensity into the whole Old Testament that he does with, the passages dealing with his favorite topic of hell or whatever, I said, there's a chance that you would end up an open theist, because of some of your.
Well, I'd like to hear him respond to that.
Yeah. Your insistence upon almost in kind of a dry literalism when it comes to death, and destruction and all of that stuff, and discounting, people who want to smuggle in some ideas of separation or all of this other stuff,
Yeah, going to go on to this question that's on the screen in just a second, but do you see this shirt? I'll let you pause it so that you can read all those things. These are some favorite topics of mine. I bet some of your favorite topics are on there too. You can get those at Teespring, at our Teespring shop. Hope you check that out. There's probably a merch bar right below. Also, we'd love for you to become a student at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary, Trinitysem.edu. All right, so Trinity Radio question. Sorry for the hashtag basic new atheist question, but what was the functional role of Christ's sacrifice if we still have a sin nature and can still be damned by our sins? Like, what changed? So, for me and Jonathan, what we affirm about original sin is not that you have a sin nature and a guilt nature. The sin nature would be, I'll say it as the Southern Baptist Baptist Faith and Message 2000 puts it, the sin nature, as far as I agree with this, what we have because of Adam is a nature and an environment that is inclined towards sin. Okay? I think we can all agree about that. We have a nature and environment that is inclined towards sin.
Yes.
On the other hand, some people want to say you also have a guilt nature, that because of what Adam did, you are already ipso facto guilty. Now, we believe the Bible teaches elsewhere that God won't hold a person responsible for his father's sins or something like that. Now, there are places in Scripture where we see the consequences of someone's sins impacting naturally another person's life, like being in your parents were in bondage, so now you're in bondage, and it's because of what they did that they ended up in bondage, or their parents, or something, or some king. But now here you are; those are consequences. But there's I don't find this notion that you are born already culpable and guilty of Adam's sin. But I do believe you have a sin nature. You have a nature and an environment inclined towards sin. And we all end up sinning on our own. So now bringing that around, what changed? What happened there? Now, Calvinists and non-Calvinists will answer this myriad ways, or at least in a couple of different ways. Calvinists believe in limited atonement. So the people that Jesus died for are the ones that will be saved. He didn't die for those who won't be saved, at least not in the same sense. He died for those that would be saved. Not any of that is wasted. You'll sometimes hear people say it is effective. It does save those that it's intended to save, right? The way I framed that, and I was a part of a book project called Anyone Can Be Saved with a bunch of guys, PhDs from Baptist schools, and you can, and in fact, it's in Spanish. I was just giving my copy to, I can't say it in Spanish, but Anyone Can Be Saved is the name of it, from Whip and Stock. And so the way I've argued this there, and the way that Adam Harwood argued it in that book, Systematic Theologian, is, if I remember correctly, is basically to say that when Jesus died, he died for the sins of everyone. But it's as if the way you want to look at it in terms of how it practically worked is, did he save you? Well, here's what happened. Imagine that you won an automobile in a sweepstakes, and they put it in your name, and they brought it and put it in your driveway, and it's your car. There it is, and the job has been done. Everything's been done. The thing is, if you never go out there and get in the car and drive it, then it's not effective for you. And in the same way, anyone can be saved. Jesus died for everyone, but you have to take advantage of that salvation. You have to become one with Christ. Jonathan, any cleanup there to do?
No, that was good.
Excellent. Tim the Ancient says...
Hey, thank you for the super chat. One of my favorite people on Twitter.
Love him. Are there any apologetics resources on Old Testament violence that are useful? The ones I've seen are just trying to convince me that it's all good because technically it wasn't a genocide, or Israelite slaves were treated nice. The book that comes to everyone's mind. I know that Randall Rouser has one from I won't say progressive, but not as conservative position, not as traditional, let's say, position. Paul Copan's the one that always comes up as the one that is kind of
God is not a moral
nice
monster.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to kind of make it sound not quite as bad, where it's not quite as bad, but also
then you have
be
Crucifixion of the
realistic
Warrior
about.
God if you want to go the other way, kind of the Randall Rouser way.
Yeah.
I read all of it. I'm not even. What was the one? The God is not great one. God is not a moral monster.
Yeah, that's Paul Copan.
Paul Copan. Yeah. I'm even I'm like, I take the position that no one likes and that wishes that apologists wouldn't take, and that's the get over it position. It's pretty rough. The ancient world's a rough place, and God was dealing with the ancient world, and so, I agree that it technically wasn't genocide. It was judgment, but the fact is that it's just a tough ancient world. We don't want to be chronological snobs here. So, you can do your best to try to pretty it up. It doesn't matter what you do. People who don't like God aren't gonna like your answer. People don't like Greg Boyd or Rouser's answer either. You're never going to make atheists happy or non-believers happy. So good luck with that. Sorry, but it's just no matter how much you try to soften it up, it's just never going to make anyone who outside the camp happy about it.
John Beaver says, "Can you repeat
Crucifixion of the Warrior God?" And I think he wrote like a popular level version of that too. But I even disagree with Mike Winger, because even though I don't agree with Greg Boyd's conclusions in that book, I think Mike said it was a horrible book, and I'm like, no, it's actually an incredible book that I recommend everyone should read. It's got a wonderful bibliography, especially if you're interested in discussions about the New Testament use of the Old Testament. I think he dug up every single resource known to man, for the bibliography on that. So, it actually is a valuable resource. Even if you're like me and you don't agree with it, it's well written too. So it's very enjoyable for a huge 2-volume book. I love Mike Winger. Disagree him on that one. I don't disagree with Mike on agreeing that Boyd is wrong, but I do disagree that I don't think it's a horrible book, and I don't want to dissuade people from reading it. I think that when Christians say you shouldn't read I get real nervous about Christians telling other Christians not to read books with differing opinions than the mainstream evangelical opinions. That's just not how this should work. So,
okay, Jonathan Pritchett, what do you think about Christ and subordinationism?
In the economy, yes. In the economy of the Trinity, sure. But in the ontological Trinity, absolutely not. I am not an ESS person.
Well, but...
And I think I don't know why he asked that. He knows that, so maybe he just wanted me to address it.
He wanted you on record. 1 Corinthians 11:3.
On record? I've been on record. How many times? I think that I'm on record in a previous episode saying that, I'm kind of with... who was it? Was it Giles? Kevin Giles, I think. They're kind of teetering on heresy.
For those that don't know what we're talking about, he wants, it's response to a passage like 1 Corinthians 11:3, which says, "But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God."
Kephale versus Akron. Yeah. I don't even know. It's just even still that even if you don't want to get into like parsing out all the possible meanings of Kephale, you could still just say, in the functional economy of the Trinity, the incarnate Christ is subordinated in that sense, but not ontologically. So and it's a voluntary subordination anyway. Derek Beeler had an interesting question, but
let's finish this one up on the same point. So what implications does that have for salvation of pre-Christ people? Did they not have a car to drive to make use of? No path to salvation? Well, faith is given in Hebrews and elsewhere as these people had faith in God insofar as the light they were given. And the way that most Christians will frame this up is to say these people were putting their faith in God and they are savable in virtue of the future sacrifice of Christ. Anything to add there, Jonathan?
No, I mean, dispensationalists would probably nitpick with that thing, and they would say they would probably go with something like covenant nomism for some would go with more of that view of, you expressed that through your Torah obedience or whatever, but I'm kind of covenantal in it's by grace through faith, period. Before Christ and after Christ.
Through faith.
Yes. Faithfulness.
Yeah.
Better way to say it.
Okay. I thought I would put this instead of reading it because there's
I like reading the little. I like it when you read the
face screaming in fear. Yeah. All right.
No, I like it when you have to read those things.
You said Baylor had a question or a statement or a comment.
He asked about. I don't remember where it was.
Derek, I'm so sorry.
Derek, I think.
Well, let's answer some of these questions here. Okay, here's from Brian Stevens. If my mom gets to heaven, is she free to be sad that I'm in hell? Yeah, so when we go, first of all, I don't think of heaven. I have, let's put it this way, an earthier view of heaven than a lot of people, partly because I believe it'll be on earth. But secondly, because I don't think, we're talking about no pain in heaven. But
no tears.
I know, but
that's just an expression.
I know, but we also talk about no pain in heaven. And when we talk about no pain in heaven, I don't think it's going to be the case that when we go and do a hard day's work, that we don't have that good feeling of I used my muscles and they're sore or something like that. I don't think no pain in heaven means something like that. And I don't think the idea of no tears necessarily means that the human experience changes so dynamically that your mother doesn't remember you or something like that, right?
Does heaven have a place for somber reflection? Yes. That's
now is your mom going to have her joy stolen as a result of this, such that heaven is no longer heaven? I don't think so. And part of this may also have to do with what your understanding of hell is. And if that's something you're interested in, listen to either my lecture at the recent Rethinking Hell conference, or you can listen just to the last video. I cover it there too.
So I've lost my dad and my brother so far, and I'm sure there's going to be, the older I get, the more people seem to be losing. Do I have uncontrollable grief over it now? No. Do I have somber reflection? Yes. Do I still find joy in life? Yes. So, I mean, I don't know why the human experience would be any different in that sense. Not that you just couldn't be just so distraught that you can't function in heaven. No, but do I think that a mother who knows that her son is not in heaven could have a moment of reflection about that and it not just completely devastate her? Absolutely, sure. Regardless of your view of hell on that, I think. But
New Testament theologist wants to know, why does Prime look like he's just seen a diet soda?
He's talking about the thumb.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I celebrate diet soda. I'm with what's his name, Coach Greg, on this. Diet soda is awesome. And Bedford Garp, who I'm talking about, Dr. Hamilton. I have a doctor who said, yeah, unless you have enough aspartame to kill an elephant all at once, you're probably not even going to so much as get risk of cancer. So quit worrying about it. Drink your diet soda. So
Derek Baylor says, where do Reformed theologians get their definitions or impressions of libertarian free will from? I noticed in their writings, they seem to consistently drop the ball and don't cite sources.
Yes, most of them don't. If you're reading popular level why Calvinism is awesome, or why Arminianism stinks, or why Arminianism is super awesome and why Calvinism is garbage, if you're reading those types of books, I think the non-Calvinists do a little bit better, but not much better at citing not just citing some R.C. Sproul said this in his book. I mean, R.C. Sproul is not, he was writing popular level books. So if you're wanting somebody who in either one of those types of books, this is why I've said consistently on this show for years, don't read those kind of books if you want to learn about soteriology. They're like except for Leighton Flowers, because he pays me to say that. But no, seriously.
And he published his first book.
Yeah. Those books really aren't the best source of information, and they're not written by people who are trying very hard to be academic as possible. And so because those books are polemical in nature, they're going to present libertarian free will in a way that won't make you happy, just like I probably presented determinism in a way, for the purposes of this show, that's not going to make a determinist happy. That's okay. That's what you're getting into on popular level stuff. Mm-hmm. And just because they don't present libertarian free will in a way that makes you happy doesn't mean that that you can't find you can get a different definition from Braxton Hunter on this than you can from William Lane Craig on certain things about libertarian free will.
John Beaver just said, didn't JP just say bad things about people who say don't read this book?
I said don't read those books if you want to learn about soteriology. I didn't say don't read those books for entertainment because they're entertaining.
Like you're not saying don't read them like for entertainment.
Yeah.
Right? Like
I didn't say don't ever read those books. I said don't read those books if you want to learn about soteriology. Yeah. That's a full thought. If you're saying...
But that's not entirely true.
I didn't say don't...
Although, I'll tell you what, you're right, because didn't I just say yesterday about something else? Like we were talking about, there's so many things, and Calvinism is one of them, where like when I was much younger, and I thought, and I didn't know much about the terminology, and it was explained to me, I had the understanding that, well, Calvinists must affirm that God like determines everything, and like we may feel like we're making choices, but it's all been determined. That's what I thought. And then I had all these Calvinists and academic Calvinists come along saying, no, it's much more subtle than that. It's more nuanced. You need to read the best minds
fully
on
orbed,
this.
diamond shaped, and not.
And so then I got into it, and I was like, okay, well, no, compatibilism must be a little different, and okay, well, let's try to figure this out. Turns out in the end, no. I was right. On Calvinism, God determines everything. And do you know how many times it is true that, like, as you begin learning and you seek knowledge, you begin to master a subject, and you get more enlightened is a real bad cliche type gooey term, but you do kind of learn a lot more about that. But sometimes it turns out to be that the nutshell version of it was absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, those soteriology argument books, I think that, I mean, they have their place to introduce people and get a good idea of where the discussions are at. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking for rigorous academic citations and all of that from the best scholarships of both camps, and expecting a Michael Horton or what's the guy is
the guy that writes with Michael Horton all the time? I can't even remember his name.
He's a big time Arminian guy. His name is escaping me right now. But I think he was in Waco at Baylor. But they wrote books together, like For Calvinism.
They have really cool Calvinism. Cover, like For Calvinism. And
yeah, I can't remember his name. He's a big time Arminian. He wrote Arminian.
Roger Olson.
Roger Olson. Thank you. It was just I was having a. Okay, so Roger Olson. I like
no
Roger
Google
Olson.
Necessary for that. Just let the man go to the
I
file.
like Roger Olson. I like Michael Horton. I'm not impressed with either one of their books, and I don't think that they were trying to write for popular level audiences, and they're going to be a little bit polemical.
Yeah, he comes along.
And you just have to know what you're getting into.
You don't
with
get credit
those.
for that.
But if you want to learn, like things that are representative of like citing the best scholar, you're not going to get those from those types of books. You're just not.
Look,
I didn't say don't ever read them though. They're fun to read. They're just not going to give you what you want. And to be fair, the Arminian non-Calvinist side is not going to give you the best of the other side either.
Guess what, Nick? You don't get credit
for that. See, I can
be
fair.
You don't get credit for that. I thought of that all on my own.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that cell phones has ruined is the satisfaction of what is the name of that guy, and then you think of it, dopamine hit. You know. Yeah. All right, this has been a fun
choice
episode.
meats like the Septuagint, Habakkuk 1:16, or the finest.
All right, well, I've enjoyed this. Pritchett, anything else to add?
Yeah.
I think we've had a good fun time.
Yeah, it's always fun.
We love all of you. I know we haven't done a live stream in a few weeks, and the last thing we did live was a debate between two other guys. But we're back, and we're back in business, and we're going to keep trucking.
And it's fun to be back. And we're talking about Calvinism stuff and atheism stuff at the same time. So it's like we struck gold here. Folks, I really hope that you do have a wonderful new year. Make 2023 a year as good as possible. It's starting off great because if you're like me, you're celebrating one of the few political wins, which is this is the next best thing to a government shutdown as far as I'm concerned. When a government is gridlocked, a government that does nothing is a government that doesn't bother you. So those are my politics. I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. I don't like
Uber Scheiser says dopamine, completely natural phenomenon.
Yes. Enjoy this
Yes,
government
of course it is.
shutdown, our government gridlock for as long as it lasts, and make the most of it, because then they'll be back to the big state and
Quick and pithy
ruin
today.
your life.
That's what they call me. Quick and pithy.
Yep.
That's my name. Yeah, y'all don't know about this. Let me tell you. A couple of years ago, I had enough of Calvin. It's like every episode, Jonathan going off about Calvinism. I don't even know if they can hear me. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
There was I installed what I called the Soterio ban, a ban on discussing soteriology. And it lasted for a month, I think, or a couple of months. We might have to install another Soterio ban, but actually, we haven't talked about it in a while.
No.
Yeah.
No, we haven't. It's good to talk about it every now and then. Anyway,
Why don't
I
you
wish
close
you
this
all
out,
the
Bridget?
happiest of New Year's. Make this New Year great. Be one of the very, very few people on planet Earth that can actually accomplish what they resolve to do. If you made a resolution, succeed in it. I wish you the best.
Is that it? You done?
I'm done.
Well, okay.